The Rough Drafts podcast is sponsored by Unicorn.com, the world's premier esports betting site. Bet on your favorite games like CSGO, Dota 2, and League of Legends, and earn Unicoins through successful bets, or use Unicorn's exclusive Connect program, where you can earn Unicoins just by playing some of your favorite games. Use your earnings to enter Unicorn's raffles for exciting prizes like Logitech peripherals or CSGO skins. So join Chase and Walter and prove who really is the esports gambling expert. Unicorn.com. Log on today.
Hello, Internet. This is Chase RedShirtKing Wassenar, and welcome to day 5. I actually got my whole hand in the picture that time of our North American LCS team-by-team preview podcast series. We have broken down a lot of very interesting North American teams. We talked about TSM, Dignitas, Cloud9, and yesterday, Envious. And today, I am joined by my good friend Walter Ceades Fedczuk to get us to the halfway mark. Walter, how you doing, man?
I'm so excited to talk about this team. I feel like everyone's gonna pick this team as a sleeper, but I don't care. I'll hop on that bandwagon because I think they got a pretty solid team here.
I don't even know if they're a sleeper anymore, because at this point there are so many things you can point to with this Phoenix1 roster, and that is the organization we're talking about today, having risen from the ashes of an 0-9 start to their regular season. They managed to win 5 of their next 9 series to get to 8th place. They 3-0'd Echo Fox. They really never looked back after they finally got all of their visa situations approved of, and Inori got to move into the jungle position. That was a huge moment for them. Obviously, Zig, their top laner, has also stayed with the team. Fly is their head coach, who did a huge job, I think, of turning that team around. Very few coaches can handle going 0-9 and still make what feels like a success, at least a morally successful season out of it. And Pyrian is on the roster, but chances are that Ryu, who they grabbed from H2K, is likely to be the starter more often than not. They also got Arrow from KT Rolster, so they get to pile up on that Korean synergy. And Adrian, the support from Immortals, an incredibly talented player, who's now being paired with another aggressive AD carry, but one that isn't quite as suicidal as Wild Turtle is. So, Walter, how do you feel about this offseason for Phoenix1?
I think this is the second best offseason in the LCS.
There you go.
This is the second best. I'll say NALCS. I'll say NALCS because I have to remember every single move in the European LCS, and I don't have that in front of me right now. So, yeah, only behind Dignitas. I think this is the best roster changes that any team has done. The addition of Ryu and Arrow, I think, are phenomenal. Really good carries that can fill specific roles. Arrow, like you said, he's aggressive, but he's not as wild as Wild Turtle. So Adrian doesn't need to put as much of a leash on him. I think this is going to allow Adrian to play a little bit more and show us that he does have an expanded champion pool, play a little bit outside what we have his stereotypical style to be, and really let him prove that he deserves to be up there with the top supports in the region. And then Inori, a full split of Inori. He has every marker of a breakout jungler like Dardoch. And that's why I say I think this team is a sleeper. I think that people are still going to kind of disregard them because they view, Zig as kind of a weak link, and they view Inori still as kind of a weak link just because he hasn't had that really big showing. But let's not forget, they are the one in 17-1 for TSM. They are the one loss. This is the one team that was able to beat them in a best-of-3 series. So I have really high hopes and really high expectations for this team, especially with the talent that they've been able to add to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it is one of those things where you look at Phoenix1, and this is what you want to see in a team that's struggled out of an offseason. You want to see them, identify the problem spots and fix that. For them, that was the bot lane. They did not feel competent with the bot lane they had last split. Just got rid of them. Just, found out, got the best North American support that was on the market, got a great Korean AD carry and were willing to pay the money on that. And the other big thing I want to give them credit for is signing Ryu. This is one of those things where when Ryu and Vander got released, people were complaining about, oh, it's late in this, late in the free agency period. All these people have already been signed and this hurts their value. And Phoenix1 said, screw that. Ryu is available. We'll sign him. I don't care that we already signed Pyrian earlier this split. We're going to get a guy that has Worlds experience, just took, helped play on a semifinals team last year. A guy that has really reinvented himself multiple times throughout his career and now has some veteran leadership to bring to, this Inori and Zig combination of younger guys. I thought that just across the board, they seem to have a really good understanding of what this team needed to succeed. And, when you pointed out the guy that you're most excited to see whether he's going to succeed or not, that's Inori.
Absolutely.
Inori coming middle of the season. Not, a perfect player by any means. His 0-5 Olaf, I think, is something that people are going to point to and say that that's a concern. But when you say that he's showing Dardoch kinds of tendencies, what are you seeing in the film that gets you so excited about this guy?
So he's not afraid to take risks. He's not afraid to go into where there isn't vision. It's usually intelligently too. It's not just like blind. I'm just gonna run in here like a bronze player. And he reads the map pretty well. He reads his opposing junglers fairly well. Has that aggressive streak. Really likes to gank. I just don't think Olaf fits him as a champion. Olaf doesn't really fit Dardoch as a champion either. They tend to want a little bit more high mechanical champions, high damage champions, and Olaf doesn't have quite as interesting gank paths as things like Lee Sin. I think that the advent of plants are going to be huge boons for Inori and for Dardoch, but we'll get to Dardoch on a later episode of the pod. And will be a boon because it'll allow him to play some other champions, things like Rengar, and come up with even more interesting ganking paths. Very innovative in terms of what he likes to do. He's not really against finding different junglers, especially if you watch his stream or you look at him up on op.gg. He's really likes to try and find different ways to play champions or different champions to try out. Especially when the new season started, he was very, on his op.gg, you could see him testing out everything. And I'm sure everyone was testing out everything, but he was testing out junglers that I never would want to ever jungle. Diana, I don't think it's competitively viable, but he was playing her quite a bit. Things like that. He's just very willing to try things. And it just reminds me of Dardoch after that spring split. In the offseason, he was trying everything. He was really working on his gank paths. He was really working on his mechanics. He'd spam Lee Sin. If he played 20 games, he'd play Lee Sin in 18 of them because he wasn't happy with how he was, hitting his flash kicks or his gank paths or all these other things. So I think he's got that young sort of cocky streak in him and has had it for a while. And this is the first team that he's been on that he's really shown some solid success because he's had some consistent playing time. He tried to play on that Roar squad that didn't go very well. He was finally able to break the mold of being like a Rengar one trick with this, spring split. So I'm very excited to see him break out, and I think he has all these hallmarks of the tools to be a really breakout jungler.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. You talk about ingenuity. This is a guy who won with Mordekaiser jungle last split.
Yeah,
we totally forget that game because it was a win in a best of 3 against Immortals, which is a series they ended up losing, and regular season series of teams that are already out of the playoffs don't really get a ton of attention. But Mordekaiser jungle, I'm just gonna keep repeating that because it's such a strong statement towards why Inori is so exciting to watch. Because, as you said, it's that work ethic plus a mind that is able to come up with different ways to play the game, both in terms of champion pool, having the depth to be able to adapt to every meta, but also pathing issues. The guy now is going to have players around him who should theoretically give him much safer paths throughout the jungle. He shouldn't have to worry about having to gank for mid lane because unlike last year where Pyrion was back all of the time and therefore gave no real room for a nice gank, Ryu will get in people's faces. He will be able to take advantage of that. And Arrow and Adrian are obviously a far more aggressive bot lane than anything he played with last split. So this gives him two really great targets as far as lanes to gank consistently. And when you have that, suddenly the map opens up for you and you're able to do a lot more than we've seen from him so far. So his ceiling is incredibly exciting. But there's another player here, Walter, who you expressed some concerns about, and I am concerned as well.
Yes.
Because while Inori has a whole bunch of potential, Zig is a guy who has bounced around in the Challengers series for a while now. It feels like we know what he is, and what he is doesn't necessarily match the influx of talent that we have seen in the top lane position in North America. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you for this?
It's like a 6, but it's not because we know who he is. I don't think we do know who he is. I think hasn't had a chance to really emerge and really show off who he is. I think he's been in some bad situations. He didn't have his primary jungler, for the beginning of the split in the summer. It took a while for him and Inori to get on the same page. I think some champion pool issues are there. I think he's primarily more of like a bruiser kind of top lane player as opposed to a pure tank. He's young. Like, he's played in the Challenger Series, but he doesn't have a ton of Challenger Series experience. So I don't think it's we know who he is. Like, he's going to fit in this very rigid box with someone, say, like Seraph. I think the problem is just that at this point in his career, I don't think he matches up against the top lane talent that we do have in North America because of the imports, because of Someday, because of Flame, even Haunters, Impact, Looper, Darshan. Like, as we start going down the list, he starts bumping further and further down. And I don't think that's indicative of, him. I don't think that he doesn't have a chance to be that type of player. I just think that he hasn't had the chance to show he can be that type of player, be in a really good situation, very solid situation. Arrow and Adrian are going to take a ton of pressure into that bot lane. Ryu and Pyrion and their synergy with Inori, Pyrion and Inori in particular towards the end of the summer split, that's going to take some pressure off of him. So now if we're taking all this jungler pressure away from the top, that now sets him up in mainly 1v1 scenarios, which again, I don't think he's going to match up against Flame or Someday, but now if Inori can get that gank off into the top lane, it may show that on more even footing he might have a chance, because no one was afraid of Mash and Gate. Outright, nobody's really going to be afraid of that lane straight up, which is
understatement
fine.
Of the day. I think.
Yeah, it's fine. So junglers really put a lot of attention on Zig, and the team tried to make him the primary carry for the majority of the split. I don't think that's his role. I don't think he can be the primary carry. So bring in Ryu, who's a good secondary carry, having Inori improve, be a good secondary carry, and Arrow, who's going to be the primary carry. That, I think, is going to take a lot of the pressure off of Zig and hopefully open things up for him. I just don't think that's going to be enough, and I think some of his his growth is going to be stunted because he's going to get his beat in, because he's going to be playing against one of the top 3 top laners in the world in Someday. Flame, who's shown he's very good in lane, and Dardoch is willing to gank for him. Looper is a pretty solid laning. You kind of get my point. Just the names he's against are frustrating.
Yeah, it's difficult. And honestly, I'm going to disagree with you on one point, which is do we know who he is? Well, he's been playing since 2012. Here are all of the teams that he has played on since 2012. So I'm not including anything from before that point. Just Your Average Joe's, Monomaniac, Team Dynamic, Pulse Esports, Dignitas, Nexus Gaming, Team Curse, Team LoLPro, Team Liquid, playing for the Liquid Academy for a long time, but he was also a sub for the main team. And then Phoenix1 now. He's played on a lot of teams for a long time across many metas. He's never been better than he was last split. I think he's peaked. And I know that sounds, unfair to say because it was his first split in the LCS for a significant period of time, but he has been around. He has been an option. And the guy did not look particularly great during a lot of that Challenger stint. And he did not look particularly great last split. If you just look at the sheer numbers, his Shen was great, but the drop-off after that was pretty rough. There wasn't a single other champion with more than 2 games played in which he had a KDA higher than 2.4. That's not ideal. It's really something that he's going to have to prove that there's a lot more diversity than he's shown at any point in his career. But I think you do make a very good point in that there's going to be a lot of attention drawn away from him that teams were able to focus on him last split. Mashme is not a very good AD carry. This is the first time in a long time we're not going to have to watch him in the LCS, which makes me happy as an individual, but also just, means that with so much more attention being drawn to the bot lane and the mid lane, he's going to be in the best position ever to succeed. I just think we've seen what success looks like for him already, and I'm not convinced that's going to be enough. But there's one other factor I think that's going to determine this just a little bit more, and these are, adjusting to these new Koreans. Because obviously they played with Pyrian before. Had Pyrian remained their starting mid laner, we wouldn't necessarily have as many questions. Adapting Ryu to the lineup would be, pretty easy to do. But now you have 2 different players coming in, one of which has, gotten used to these European traits now and is now having to get used to North America. Another one coming straight from Korea. Walter, are you concerned at all with how these players are going to mesh, or do you think that this will be a pretty smooth transition given, the experience Fly has with these kinds of things?
So I think it is going to be kind of a smooth transition. Like you said, Ryu's been in Europe. He has decent English from what I've heard, from what people have told me. My issue with him is more how quickly does he pair up with Inori? How well do they play together? Because, we keep saying the end of the summer split. Phoenix1 did, they weren't perfect in the end of the summer split. They still lost some series, but they were definitely way more competitive. They did take a game off of Immortals. They took that series off of TSM. They were way more competitive in the back half of the split than as opposed to the first half of the split. And during that time, Inori and Pyrian had really, really good synergy. They read each other very well. They were always there to back each other up. They were Bash Brothers. They were, 2 peas in a pod. The change to Ryu does worry me slightly in that regard, but he did show that type of synergy with Jankos. Good follow-up, following him in the enemy jungle, making sure it was well warded, calling for ganks, etc., etc. Adrian and Arrow worries me slightly because it is kind of a change for Adrian. He does not have to be this pure bodyguard anymore. He can go and roam some. He can kind of expand his playstyle. And finding the right mesh between bot laners is always a challenge. We saw with Doublelift and Yellowstar in the past spring. Just because you have 2 really good players doesn't necessarily mean they're going to work out. So if those things do happen, though, especially the bot lane, which is where my primary concern from that is, Arrow is probably the best AD carry in North America without seeing him play against the other AD carries. Just looking at it, I'm pretty confident in saying that. I don't think that really mechanically anyone quite matches up to him, except maybe Piglet in just terms of pure mechanics. And he was a smart enough player, always played intelligent, had really, really good spacing on KT. Adrian, we've been talking about top 2 support in North America for a better part of a year now. So if those 2 match up together, you have an emerging talent in Inori that's in that jungle position that I think could possibly break out and be the next Dardoch, the next good North American jungler. You have Ryu and Pyrian, Ryu, like you said, coming off a great season, coming off a great split, going to the World Semifinals. Pyrian, who has already shown that he has synergy with this young jungler. I think those will be enough to hold up some of the deficiency that Zig has, but it really is going to be, if those 2 groups can't sync up and can't mesh up, they're going to have problems early on. And, if we're getting to week 7 and we're still seeing Arrow and Adrian struggle together, I mean, you're not going to be successful if your players aren't playing well together.
Yeah, I think playing well is usually a prerequisite towards success. I think most people would agree with you on that.
Sometimes.
Yeah, usually. I mean, tell that to the Texans this year. But, I have to fire them
brutally
before these playoffs get in.
Brutally
so
fired.
It's look, I understand where you're coming from. I made a little bit more at ease by the fact that they've signed Fly to be their coach. I thought that was an inspired signing as far as head coaches go. Obviously, there are a lot of people who could point to LMQ and Team Impulse and say like, oh man, that was some sketchy teams to be a part of, but that wasn't his fault. That was a management problem and never being given enough talent. And what he was able to accomplish with Royal Never Give Up when they did have talent is incredibly impressive. And the guy, because he has a history of being a Korean coach who worked in other regions, he has experience getting players adjusted to new environments and helping them bridge language barriers. It's obviously not quite the same. It's not a one-to-one comparison because right. China and North America are obviously very different in terms of getting players to adjust. But certainly, if any coach has the skill set you would want to make this transition easier for Arrow, it would be him. Mm-hmm. And Ryu certainly is going to act as a veteran, someone who's already proven that he can adjust to a new environment. I'm very excited to hear where you think this team's going to end up, because I think there are a lot of different numbers that are going to be thrown around over the next few weeks. And I can both argue myself into and out of just about 7 or 8 different spots. So where do you put them, Walter?
I'm going to put them as a top 5 team. I believe they're going to end up being a top 5 team. I think that it's going to be incredibly tight at the top 2. Despite the fact that Phoenix1, despite the fact that Dignitas have made some like massive improvements, there are still some of the old guard that I think are still strong teams. As much as I bemoan Wild Turtle, TSM, you still have the best player in North America in Bjergsen. Maybe someday we'll challenge that. We'll see. But I think theirs is still a strong roster. We haven't talked about, teams like Immortals. We haven't talked about CLG yet. Cloud9, again, they could surprise us. They seem to always be, top 3 in North America. I definitely say top 5, though. End of the season, they're making the playoffs. They're, very easily could make it to the semifinals, depending on what their first round matchup is. If we see, one of these other teams fall back a little and they have to play against someone like Dignitas in the first round, then things can get very dicey. But honestly, if things break right, I think this team could be a dark horse to get into the finals. And I know that's a little but I think that if it breaks right, that they match up pretty well against everyone. Like I said, if Inori really breaks through here and becomes the next Dardoch, you're really pairing him with 2 really, really strong lanes as long as everything meshes. And Zig, I think there's a chance for him to improve, especially if his jungler improves exponentially.
I gotta say, I feel crazy because I don't think that's crazy. And the fact that it's not crazy is absolutely crazy.
Yes!
You guys can follow that at home.
Yeah.
Look, I like this team quite a bit. My instinct is to put him top 4. That's kind of where my heart's leading me, just because I love the Arrow-Adrian combination. I think Arrow is the perfect person for Adrian to lane with, just in terms of, hey, turns out you can be aggressive and know how to position.
Right?
It's going to blow Adrian's mind.
Exactly.
He has no idea that AD carries can do both of those things.
Exactly.
He spent his entire career with it being one or the other. I think Ryu is so consistent. I think it opens Inori up. Obviously, Zig is a concern. I'm more concerned about Zig than you are. I just, as a general rule, when we have new teams roll around and all of this new talent gets poured in, you have to look at, well, what's reliable? Well, TSM is reliably good. CLG is reliably good. Cloud9 is reliably good. Everyone else we're looking at in that next spot has very clear strengths and very clear weaknesses. And I think whether you're talking Phoenix1, Dignitas, or Immortals, I think you can make a very good case for any one of them being the 4 seed, and I think you can make a case for any one of them being a 6 seed. Mm-hmm. And that, doesn't even take into consideration, I think, the team we're going to talk about next time around that is very mad at us right now. There's a fan base who's listening to all the names I rattled off and saying, what about me? Well, come back next Monday. We're going to take the weekend off, but we will be back on Monday to talk about that. You can also, of course, talk to us on social media at any time. I'm at RedShirtKing on Twitter. Walter, where can the nice people at home find you?
Yeah, you guys can hear me praise my love for this team. I won't say the organization yet because he's still responsible for every bad Adam Sandler movie ever, which is all but 2.
Yeah.
So you guys can find me at Ceades _LOL.
There you go. And whether you want to talk about League of Legends or bad Adam Sandler movies, feel free to hit us up. Otherwise, come back next week on Monday when we're going to talk about a team that we're not quite solid on where they're going to finish up, but they're hoping to reign over the rest of the competition. So until then, goodbye, Internet.
Hey there, Ceades here. Thanks for checking out the podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, consider supporting us at www.patreon.com/roughdraftspod. For just $1 a month, you can join your fellow listeners in our patron-only Discord channel and help keep the content coming, or join our VIP club where $1 a show or $8 a month gets you first priority on all patron content like our patron-only Q&As. And check us out on all of our social media, Twitter @RoughDraftsPod, Facebook.com/RoughDraftsPod, SoundCloud.com/esportsroughdrafts, as well as on iTunes and YouTube by just searching for the Rough Drafts Podcast. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, Internet.